Hi there. I thought I'd sneak in a chapter right now before I go to church. The Prince Warriors and the Swords of Rima. This is volume 3 by Priscilla Shirer. Chapter 9, New Things in Old Places. Levi was getting ready for bed when he glanced out the window of his room and noticed the tree house. He hadn't been out to the treehouse in quite a while. His dad had built it when he was 6, so that whenever Levi wanted to run away, which was pretty often in those days, he would have a place to go. Sometimes he went out to read his favorite adventure books by flashlight or practice sketching in a drawing pad that he preferred to keep secret. Often he stayed out so long that he fell asleep, and when he woke up, he would find a plate of cookies and a thermos of milk sitting on the windowsill, a gift from his mother. Lately, though, he had been too busy to go to the treehouse. He thought maybe he was outgrowing it. He'd outgrown a lot of things, like wearing the same shirt every day and not brushing his teeth. He did that for a full week once, not brush his teeth, that is. He came home from camp one summer, and his mom had been horrified that he hadn't even opened the brand new travel toothbrush that she had packed. There were a lot of things he used to think were cool that weren't anymore. The treehouse was one of them. He picked up his phone and looked at the screen. 10 o'clock p.m. Same day as the kayak race. Yet it felt as though a year had passed. He grabbed the kris and threw a jacket over his pajamas. Climbing out the window onto a thick tree limb, he crawled a short distance, then shimmied through the narrow doorway. The neighbor's dog started barking, which it always did at even the slightest movement in the yard. That dog never missed anything. Levi turned on the small battery-powered lantern and looked around. Large, complicated spider webs inhabited every corner. The floor was very dusty. Levi cleaned off the top of the short three-legged stool he kept there and held the kris to the light, wondering what sort of secrets it held. The lantern dimmed and went out. Dead battery. Levi frowned, then went to find a flashlight in the wooden box where he kept his special treehouse supplies. But something was lying on top of the box, a large rectangular object Levi had never seen before. He reached over to pick it up. It was heavy. It was a book. Levi grabbed the flashlight from inside the box and shone it on the book. He recognized it then, the heavily embossed cover with the familiar symbol, the odd-shaped letter A for Ahoritas. This was the same book about the Prince Warrior that Brianna had, and Evan and Manuel too. He wondered if Brianna had brought it over and left it there for some reason. But even Brianna, his best friend for ages, had never been in the treehouse. This was a place that Levi kept all to himself. He opened the cover and began leafing through the pages. The illustrations were pretty intense, very colorful and dramatic. The writing was in a fancy type that was hard to read, about a prince warrior who went on all sorts of perilous adventures. Each chapter highlighted a different piece of the warrior's armor, all of which Levi now had, although the armor in the book was much fancier and more elaborate than Levi's was. More like the kind of armor people wore in gladiator movies that he and his dad liked to watch. He went right to the chapter about the sword, curious to see what the book said about it. On the title page, there was a large illustration of a beautiful, gleaming sword. It looked so real that he had to touch it. But when he did, his finger went right through it, as if there were a hole in the page. Curious, Levi shined the flashlight directly onto the page. The light revealed a strange outline in the blade of the sword, a shape that looked an awful lot like his kris. He picked up the kris and pressed it to the page to see if the outline was really the same. To his surprise, the kris slipped right into the picture, as if the hole he had discovered was perfectly conformed to the knife's shape and size. The kriss blended into the illustration of the sword so that it became almost invisible. The page began to flicker, like static on an old television set. Then a word flared across the top of the page. Implanted. This writing was not in that strange, otherworldly language. It was in plain English. Levi's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Fearing he had lost the kriss, Levi reached into the page again and pulled the small knife back out. It came out easily, and the word disappeared from the top. The page went black. Amazed, Levi put the kriss back in and took it out several times. Each time the page seemed to come alive. He didn't know for sure whether or not he was imagining this. His experience on the mountain of Rima was already pretty fuzzy. Reality blurred with his own imagination, but he had definitely gotten the sword, even if it had turned into this funny, useless little knife-like thing. But the krisses definitely seemed to belong in this book, as if it was a storage place. So was that the secret? Or was there something more to it? And what did it mean by implanted? Levi felt there had to be something more significant than just a hiding place for the kriss. He reinserted the kriss, but this time he didn't take it out quickly. He waited. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for exactly. The page flickered on like it had before, and as the static cleared away, the word implanted appeared once again across the top of the page. For a moment, nothing else happened. He was just about to take the kriss out again when he noticed that the blade in the illustration began to glow softly. And then Levi saw more writing beginning to take shape below it. The letters appeared slowly, forming into a single word. Received. Levi stared at both words, which now sandwiched his kriss, one on the top of the page and the other on the bottom. Implanted, received. What on earth did that mean? I see you figured it out. He jumped. His dad was leaning against his bedroom window, looking into the treehouse, a big grin on his face. The bedroom light reflected off his bald head. Levi wondered how long his dad had been watching him. Levi's dad, James Arthur, was known as Mr. J.R. to his friends and all the kids at the Cedar Creek Rec Center, where he acted as a basketball coach and part-time manager. He volunteered nearly every day because he said he grew up without knowing his own father and didn't want that to happen with his son. Mr. J.R. was really tall and broad-shouldered, with massive hands that could palm a basketball with ease. Everyone looked up to him, but Levi especially, even though he wasn't all that fond of basketball. And Levi's dad also happened to be a Prince warrior. Figured out what? Levi asked. How to implant the sword. Implant? There was that word again. What do you mean? You implant the kriss in the book, and the book receives it. Then it infuses the kriss with the power of the source. It's sort of like when you charge your phone, except different. This book does that? Mr. J.R. nodded. Cool, huh? I guess so. Ruach didn't tell us very much about it. I mean, we climbed this huge mountain and almost didn't make it. Then we got the swords and had a little trouble with trees, but then the swords turned into these things. Well, that climb is no picnic, I know, Mr. J.R. said with a laugh. I still remember my trek up that mountain. It can't be done without courage and perseverance, and going back down can be even worse. You can say that again. There was this huge black dragon. Ah, so you saw Antonym. Who's that? The biggest and baddest of the black dragons, a particular favorite of the enemy. Well, it got into a fight with Tanin and killed him. Levi's head dropped at the memory. Mr. J.R. raised an eyebrow at his downcast expression. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "I never saw a dragon shoot spikes from its tail. Thorns." "What?" "The black dragons shoot thorns. Thorns are a big problem for true prince warriors. You always have to be on guard against them." Levi sighed, looking down at the book in his hands. "Where did this book come from? I mean, I never saw it here before." "I left it up here a while ago, but you haven't been here in a long time." "No, I got really busy and I'm getting too big, I guess," Levi laughed. Mr. J.R. nodded. "Oh, son, some places you should never get too busy or too big for. It's good to visit the old places. You never know what you're going to find. Aren't you glad you came today?" "Yeah, this is pretty cool." "Better come inside and get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." "What's tomorrow?" "You and the other kids need to learn how to use your swords." Levi went to bed and dreamed of dragons and swords and steaming mountains. He dreamed of fire and smoke and thorns. Thorns on trees and dogs and houses. Thorns everywhere. The dream was so real and so frightening that he woke up several times with sweat pouring down the side of his face. He had to get up and get a drink of water before going back to sleep again. "Time to get up, kiddo," his father's voice boomed into his latest dream, jolting him out of a fantastical ride on Tannen's back, gliding over the world. It had been so vivid that he could actually feel the wind pressing his face, his stomach going up and down with Tannen's dips and dives. He felt sad all over again about Tannen, grateful that he could ride that goofy, wonderful dragon one more time, even if it was only in a dream. "What time is it?" he asked in a groggy voice. He ran a hand over his tapered afro. He liked to keep his hair cut low in the summer and then let it grow out in the fall when the weather was cooler. It wasn't long enough yet that his mom had started complaining about it. "7," said his dad, throwing open the curtains, although it was barely light enough outside. "In the morning? Why do I have to get up so early?" "Need to get to the wreck before it opens. I already talked to the other kids. They'll meet us there. We need a couple hours to get started. Don't forget your Chris and your book." "But Finn, how are you going to call him? We don't know where he lives or his last name or even if he has a phone. I mean, he might not even be back on Earth yet." "If he is, I'm sure Rook will find him," said Mr. J.R. "So Rook's coming too?" "Sure. Rook is helping me with the training. Grandpa Tony too. Both are very good swordsmen." "Brianna's grandfather? Isn't he kind of old?" Mr. J.R. laughed. "Some skills just get better with age." When they got to the rec center, Mr. J.R. unlocked the front door and then turned on the lights. A short time later, Mr. Blake dropped off Xavier and Evan with a big box of donuts. He had given Manuel a ride too, since Manuel lived across the street from the Blakes. The boys sat down at one of the tables and ate donuts while they waited for the rest to get there. "Your dad told us to bring our Prince Warrior book," Evan said to Levi, "but he didn't say why." "You'll find out," Levi said with a secret grin. It was cool knowing something no one else knew. Brianna and Ivy came in with Grandpa Tony, who greeted the boys with hand clasps and fist bumps, and then went to talk to Mr. J.R. Brianna and Ivy sat down at the table. Levi saw that Brianna had a new backpack. Instead of the old pink, bedazzled backpack she'd had for years, she was carrying one of those new hipster styles made of a woven fabric in a bright pattern. "Where did you get that?" Levi asked her. "Oh, Ivy gave it to me," Brianna said. She whipped out her favorite glitter lip gloss and slathered her lips. "It was a birthday present," said Ivy. "It is cool," Levi said, impressed, although he felt weirdly sad too. Ever since they became friends, Brianna spent most of her time with Ivy now. She didn't come over to Levi's house nearly as often, and she didn't hang out with him at the rec like she used to. Levi didn't mind so much. It was just that sometimes he actually missed her. He didn't tell her that, though. "Donuts," said Brianna, reaching across Levi for the box of donuts. She took a sugar-coated donut and passed the box to Ivy, who helped herself. The front door opened, and Rook, a former prisoner of Scotto's, came in with a satchel slung over his shoulder. He turned and motioned to someone outside the door. Finn appeared, glancing around cautiously before entering. His formerly round, thick afro had been tapered down on the sides like Levi's, except with a thicker tuft on the top. He was dressed in jeans and a Cedar Creek High School football t-shirt. "It's Finn," whispered Evan. "I think it's his first time back here. He told me he hadn't been back since he was freed." "He cut his hair," said Brianna. "Hey, man," said Levi, rising to greet him. They clasped hands. "How's it feel to be back?" "Okay so far," Finn murmured. His eyes darted almost nervously. "You play football?" asked Levi, noticing the shirt. "I used to." "Finn," Evan ran over and gave him a fist bump like he did with his very best friends. "Want to stay at our house?" Finn's eyes flicked to Rook, who gave him a nod and a smile. "Finn's hanging with me for a while," said Rook, "until he gets everything figured out." "Did everybody bring your books and your christen?" said Mr. J.R., coming to the table. Xavier, Manuel, and the girls took their books out of their backpacks. Levi, Evan, and Finn sat down at the table. Levi already had his book out. "I don't have one of those," said Finn, pointing to Levi's book. "I've got one for you." Rook produced a Prince Warrior book from his satchel and sat it in front of Finn. Finn glanced up at him, questioning. "It's cool," Rook said. "Levi is going to show you what he discovered about the book," said Mr. J.R. Levi looked up at his father, surprised. Go ahead, son, you show him." Levi felt everyone staring at him. He cleared his throat. "Well, I was just looking at this page with the sword last night, and I noticed there was a hole here." Levi opened his book to the sword page and stuck his finger into it, as he had done in the treehouse. The kids made noises of surprise. "I figured out that the kris actually fits in here." He pressed his kris into the page. The kids gasped when they saw it sink right in and virtually disappear. After a moment, they saw the words appear on the page. "Implanted?" said Brianna. "What does that mean?" "Implant means to insert securely," said Manuel. "Yeah," said Levi. "So when you implant the kris in the book like this, it gets filled up with power." "Wow," said Evan. "I've looked at that book 1,000,000 times and never noticed that page before." "The book reveals different things in different ways at different times," said Grandpa Tony. "It's a special book." "How did you figure it out, Levi?" asked Brianna. Levi shrugged. "I don't know, I just did." "I don't have a book," said Xavier. "Only Evan does." "The book can handle more than one sword at a time," said Mr. J.R. "You and Evan can both use the same book." "Like we have to share a phone," said Xavier with a sigh. "You'll know the sword is powered up when the crest appears in the hilt," said Grandpa Tony. "If the crest fades, it means the sword is losing power. It only takes a few minutes to charge, so you shouldn't have a problem as long as you keep the book handy." "We keep an extra book in the trunk of the closet," said Mr. J.R. "You can use that anytime, especially in emergencies." The kids practiced implanting their christen into the books and taking them out again. Once the swords were fully infused and ready to use, Mr. J.R. told them to go to the supply closet where the trunk of armor was kept and put their armor on. "Let's meet in the gym. Rook will work with Finn and Xavier Tony, you take the girls, and I will work with Levi, Evan, and Manuel. Let's do this, people.